In the 1990s, companies launched products they swore would change the world, yet you've probably never even heard of most of them. Some were ahead of their time, others just plain strange. But what made these bold, futuristic ideas crash and burn so fast? And why are they so hard to forget once you find out? Let's start with a product that aimed way ahead of its time. So far ahead, it forgot to actually work. The Apple Newton arrived in 1993, promising to read your handwriting perfectly. This personal digital assistant was supposed to turn your scribbles into perfect text. Newton was basically like having a secretary who had never learned to read but still insisted on taking notes. You wrote with a plastic pen, and the Newton would try to figure out what you meant. But here's the problem. The handwriting recognition was terrible. Write hello, and it might show up as Jello or something random. It was like playing charades with a computer that was really bad at guessing. Despite this, Apple spent years trying to fix it, but people had already decided it was an expensive mistake at almost $700. The Newton was like bringing a rocket ship to a bicycle race. When Apple's co-founder returned, he killed it immediately. Yet every tablet today is basically what Newton was trying to become. But if Apple was ahead of its time, Nintendo was about to make an even bigger mistake. Nintendo's Virtual Boy launched in 1995, promising three-dimensional gaming worlds. Instead, players got headaches and a gaming experience that looked like staring into a red kaleidoscope. The Virtual Boy was like wearing safety goggles while looking at the world through a tomato. The device looked like giant binoculars mounted on a table. You had to press your face against the eyepieces to play. Even worse, everything was red and black, because red lights were the only cheap technology available. Nintendo even printed health warnings telling people not to play for more than 15 minutes because of eye strain. When your entertainment system comes with medical warnings, you might be doing something wrong. Not surprisingly, sales were brutal. Nintendo hoped to sell millions, but barely moved 700,000 units. The Virtual Boy died faster than a smartphone battery on a cold day. The Virtual Boy disappeared within a year, teaching Nintendo that innovation needs proper execution. Speaking of great ideas with terrible execution, Microsoft Bob debuted in 1995 trying to make computers friendly by creating a cartoon house with different rooms for different tasks. Bob was like having a tour guide who kept getting lost in their own building. Instead of the usual desktop, Bob turned your screen into a virtual house where you clicked on objects to start programs. It was like turning your computer into a dollhouse, except the dolls were really slow. Things got worse when you realized Bob needed way more memory than most computers had. Loading a single room took forever. Even more annoying were the cartoon helpers, animated characters popping up constantly, offering help nobody wanted. It was like having an annoying friend who followed you around asking, "Are you okay?" every 5 seconds. Predictably, Bob actually made computers harder to use and cost almost $100 when useful software cost much less. Microsoft killed Bob after 2 years, but learned that friendly doesn't mean childish. But while Microsoft learned about interfaces, another company was building the smartphone too early. General Magic's Magic Link arrived in 1994, promising to put the internet in your pocket. This handheld communicator could send emails, receive faxes, and download programs. Basically everything smartphones do today. The Magic Link was like a time machine from the future that forgot to bring good batteries. Former Apple engineers created the device, knowing people would eventually want portable internet access. The Magic Link looked like a thick smartphone with a black and white screen. You could check email and download software over phone lines. The problem was the price. It cost $800, more than most desktop computers. Making matters worse, the internet connection was painfully slow using phone networks designed for voice calls. Downloading an email took longer than walking to the mailbox, but the fatal problem was timing. Most people had never sent an email. The Magic Link was like selling snow boots in the desert. Eventually, General Magic went out of business, but their engineers later helped create modern smartphones. And speaking of revolutionary technology arriving too early, General Motors' EV1 rolled onto California roads in 1996 as the first modern electric car from a major company. It was sleek, silent, and could travel 100 miles per charge. Then the GM took them all back and destroyed them. The EV1 was like lending your favorite book to a giant corporation that decided to burn all books. GM had spent over $1 billion creating this car with advanced aerodynamics and cutting-edge batteries. The EV1 was basically a spaceship disguised as a regular car. The vehicle was so advanced, it made regular cars look like horse-drawn carriages. But here's the weird part. GM never sold the EV1, you could only lease one. When leases ended, GM demanded every car back and crushed them or sent them to museums with broken engines. Ironically, people who leased them loved electric cars, but GM claimed there wasn't enough demand. It was like a restaurant throwing away a popular dish because they decided people didn't want it. Not surprisingly, the whole situation spawned conspiracy theories. Meanwhile, another company was bringing the internet to living rooms. WebTV launched in 1996, promising internet access through your television without buying a computer. This small box connected to your TV and phone line for web browsing and email from your couch. WebTV was like trying to read a newspaper through a magnifying glass while sitting 20 feet away. Microsoft thought this was brilliant and bought the company for over $400 million. Microsoft bet that people would rather surf the web on their big TV than squint at computer monitors. But there was a major flaw. Websites were designed for computer screens, not televisions. Text became blurry on TVs. On top of that, the dial-up connection was painfully slow. Waiting for web pages to load was like watching grass grow, except less entertaining. Even basic tasks felt awkward. Using a remote to click links felt clunky. The service never reached mainstream success, and eventually smart TVs made the concept obsolete. But while WebTV failed to merge computers and TVs, Apple was about to learn a similar lesson. Apple's Pippen gaming console debuted in 1996, trying to be a video game system, computer, and internet device simultaneously. What it became was an expensive way to disappoint everyone. The Pippen was like a restaurant serving pizza, sushi, and tacos, but terrible at making all three. Apple licensed the technology to a Japanese company instead of building it themselves. The Pippen was based on a simplified Mac computer that could play games, browse the internet, and run basic programs. In theory, it sounded perfect. In practice, it was like mixing chocolate syrup with orange juice. The biggest problem was price. $600, while other consoles cost $300. Making things worse, the game selection was pathetic, since it couldn't play regular console games. Meanwhile, the marketing was confused. They couldn't decide if it was a gaming console, computer, or internet device. Unsurprisingly, they hoped for 500,000 units, but sold only 42,000 total. The Pippen sold fewer units than some apps get downloads in an afternoon. Speaking of trying to reinvent established categories, DIVX launched in 1997, promising to eliminate late fees with movie discs that automatically expired after 48 hours. These special discs would lock themselves after 2 days. DIVX was like buying milk that would spoil exactly when you wanted a second glass. Circuit City created this format to compete with video rental stores. You'd buy a disc for $4.50, get 48 hours of viewing, then it became useless unless you paid extra fees. The problem was people didn't want to throw away movies they just bought. To make matters worse, DIVX players cost $100 more than DVD players and had to dial your phone line every viewing. Your movie player was basically a snitch calling the movie police. Meanwhile, regular DVDs offered everything DIVX promised, but better, you could watch them forever. Predictably, after 2 years of terrible sales, Circuit City killed the format. But while DIVX learned about consumer psychology, a software company was building the perfect operating system. BOS launched in 1995 as the operating system that would make Windows and Mac OS look ancient. It was faster, more stable, and designed for demanding tasks like video editing. BOS was like having a race car in a world of bicycles, except the race car couldn't drive on existing roads. A former Apple engineer started the company, frustrated with how often computers crashed. He built an operating system from scratch that was rock solid and lightning fast. BOS could handle multiple processors better than any other system and rarely crashed. BOS was basically what other operating systems wanted to be when they grew up. But here's the catch. It had one massive problem. Almost no software worked with it. Microsoft Office didn't run on BOS. Popular games wouldn't work. It was like building the world's most amazing highway but forgetting gas stations or destinations. Despite being technically superior to Windows in almost every way, Windows had thousands of programs, while BOS had dozens. The company tried everything, giving away free copies, creating Windows-compatible versions, and offering low licensing prices. Nothing worked because the software ecosystem was too small. Eventually, Apple dealt the final blow by choosing a different operating system for their computers. BOS taught the industry that technical excellence doesn't automatically win without software support. Speaking of revolutionary technology before its time, IBM Simon Personal Communicator debuted in 1994 as the world's first smartphone, combining cell phone, touchscreen computer, and digital organizer. It could make calls, send emails, and run programs. The Simon was like a crystal ball showing mobile technology's future, except it weighed like a brick and died like a mayfly. IBM created serious technology with a black and white touchscreen operated by finger or stylus. You could write notes, draw pictures, and play games. It was like carrying a tiny office that happened to make phone calls. But the Simon was enormous, almost 8 inches tall and weighing over 1 pound. The Simon was about as portable as a house cat. Battery life was terrible. 1 hour talk time or 8 hours standby. The price was brutal at $900, more than most people spent on cars. Cellular networks weren't designed for data, so sending emails took several minutes. Using internet features was like drinking thick milkshakes through coffee stirrers. Most people didn't understand what it was supposed to do. The Simon was like selling fork-spoon-knife combination tools when people were happy using separate utensils. Only 50,000 were sold before IBM discontinued it after 6 months. But IBM wasn't wrong, just 10 years too early. Speaking of ahead-of-time products, Sony's Miniisk system launched in 1992, promising to replace cassettes and CDs with something better. These small, durable discs could record and re-record digital audio while being virtually indestructible. Minidiscs were like combining the best CD and cassette features, except they only worked with equipment costing 3 times as much. Sony had good reasons to believe it would succeed. Cassettes sounded awful and broke easily. CDs sounded great, but couldn't record and skipped when bumped. Minidiscs solved both problems with perfect digital quality and unlimited recording. It was like having a professional recording studio in your backpack. You could record from any source, edit instantly, delete songs, and rearrange tracks. But here's what killed it. Cost was the major issue. Blank minidiscs cost $5 when cassettes cost under $1. To make matters worse, Sony made it complicated with different player types having different features. They also added copy protection preventing digital copies between your own discs. Meanwhile, the timing was terrible. Computers were becoming powerful enough to handle digital music files for free. Minidisc was like selling expensive train tickets when everyone was learning to drive cars. Eventually, recordable CDs let people burn custom music using cheap equipment they already owned. Sony kept it alive in Japan, but regular consumers found easier, cheaper solutions elsewhere. Speaking of expensive technological solutions, AT&T's EO Communicator arrived in 1993 as one of the first tablet computers, featuring a large touchscreen, stylus input, and wireless messaging. It was basically a modern tablet 15 years too early. The EO Communicator was like a visitor from the future who forgot the instruction manual. The EO was a full tablet computer running multiple programs and handling serious computing tasks. AT&T positioned it as a mobile office for business professionals needing computing power away from desks. It was like having a laptop that didn't fold open, which sounds great until you realize laptops fold for good reasons. The hardware was actually impressive with fast processors and wireless capabilities most computers lacked, but timing killed it completely. Wireless networks were slow and expensive. Battery life lasted hours, not days. On top of that, the system was so heavy that carrying it felt like lugging textbooks everywhere. The EO was basically a computer disguised as a clipboard that needed plugging in every few hours. Then, there was the devastating price, $4,000, more than most cars cost. Since it used its own operating system, it couldn't run regular programs. Developers had to create special software, and most didn't bother. Unsurprisingly, ATT discontinued it after 2 years, but they weren't wrong about tablets, just needed better batteries and cheaper components. Speaking of companies confusing customers, Sega's 32X launched in 1994 as a Genesis add-on, promising next-generation gaming without buying new systems. Instead, it delivered confusion and lessons in angering customers. The 32X was like turning your bicycle into a motorcycle by duct taping an engine to the handlebars. Sega was stuck. Their Genesis was getting old, but their Saturn wasn't ready. The 32X seemed clever. For $160, Genesis owners could add 32-bit power to existing consoles. The problem was asking customers to buy half a console while promising full console experiences. Making things worse, setup was ridiculously complicated, needing multiple cables connecting everything together. Then Sega made the ultimate mistake by releasing the Saturn months after the 32X launched. Suddenly, customers who just bought 32X learned Sega was moving to different systems that couldn't play 32X games. It was like buying train tickets while the company announced switching to airplanes. Meanwhile, game selection was pathetic because developers ignored the system and even Sega seemed uncommitted. Not surprisingly, sales were terrible from the start. Sega killed it after less than 2 years, leaving customers feeling abandoned. The device became a symbol of everything wrong with Sega's decision-making. But while Sega learned about customer confusion, another company discovered being first doesn't guarantee success. The Rocket ebook launched in 1998 as one of the first dedicated digital book readers. It promised revolutionary reading by putting hundreds of books in devices smaller than paperbacks. The Rocket ebook was like convincing people to eat space food when they were perfectly happy with regular sandwiches. The company believed they were creating publishing's future. The device stored about 10 books and connected to phone lines for downloading new titles. You could adjust text size, search for words, and take notes without damaging pages. The reading experience was actually decent for 1998 technology. The screen was clear, and backlights meant reading in bed without bothering anyone. But here's what killed it. Book selection was tiny compared to any bookstore. Most publishers were suspicious of digital books and wouldn't license content. Even worse, available books cost almost as much as printed versions. Paying full price for digital books was like buying expensive movie tickets for tiny screens when regular theaters were next door. On top of that, the device cost $500 when you could buy many real books for that money. Battery life was another major problem, charging every few days, and nothing ruins reading like books dying mid-chapter. Real books never needed charging and worked during power outages. Eventually, after disappointing sales, the company was bought and the product discontinued. Speaking of products predicting the future too early, Apple's QuickTake camera debuted in 1994 as one of the first consumer digital cameras, promising to eliminate film by storing photos directly in memory. The QuickTake was like having a crystal ball seeing photography's future, except the crystal ball was blurry and could only remember 8 pictures. Apple partnered with another company to create the QuickTake, which looked more like a toy than professional equipment, but it captured and stored digital images without film processing at 640 by 480 pixel resolution. Using the QuickTake was like playing photography roulette. The camera had no viewfinder, so you guessed what you were photographing. Even worse, built-in memory held only 8 photos at highest quality. Then came the complicated part. Getting photos from camera to computer required special software and specific cables. Moving photos from QuickTake to computers was more complicated than doing taxes. Apple priced it at $750, expensive for cameras taking worse pictures than $20 disposables. But the bigger problem was people didn't understand why they'd want digital photos anyway. Eventually, Apple discontinued the QuickTake after 3 years, but planted seeds that photography could be immediate and computer integrated. The failed products of the 1990s weren't really failures. They were expensive experiments teaching entire industries what customers actually wanted.